Hello there, I'm the serial plagiarist. In my quest to give the expanded universe more recognition, I read Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil, although the audiobook pronounced it Dynasty, although I think Dynasty has a better ring to it, so that's what I'll be calling it, American English for you. Anyways, I read the novel, or rather listened to it, and I gotta say, what a fitting end to a trilogy. Tonal consistency, with each entry offering something new to the story of Darth Bane. I was told that Dynasty of Evil wasn't that good, and maybe that's true from just reading text on paper, how a novel is traditionally experienced, but the audiobook was the usual great ambience, narration, music, and sound effects, so I can't speak. I went in expecting a somewhat inferior experience, but this ain't no Spider-Man 3. This was great. I'd have to say that the first two books were better, but I wouldn't call this a weak link in a trilogy. Although I would say this is definitely the shortest. I noticed that the audiobooks are shorter than the last. Path of Destruction was 12 hours long. Rule of Two was 10 hours long, and Dynasty of Evil was 9 hours long. Compare this to the Thrawn trilogy, and The Last Command was the longest one, at around 15 hours. The Darth Bane Trilogy does have sufficient pacing, so it was as long as it needed to be, but still. I was wondering if there was something more that was scrapped. In pure George Lucas canon, there wasn't a lot to go off of. Plus, Drew Karpyshyn would have to tie this in with the EU and make the whole thing flow together and make sense. It's a lot of work, but with a proper plan, something the sequel trilogy didn't have, never forget, you can map out a story effectively since you know where you're going. I'll be playing non-spoilery footage from Knights of the Old Republic, as that was the closest proximity game I could think of. Without further ado, I believe we should get into this. Dynasty of Evil picks up around 10 years after Bane narrowly escaped death at the hands of the Jedi. As I explained in the super fucked up ending, Xana killed the healer Khalib and poisoned the mind of her own cousin, resulting in him being killed by the Jedi strike team sent to eliminate the last Dark Lord of the Sith. They mistakenly thought Darovit was the Sith Lord, killed him, and left, assuming that the Sith were gone forever. Little did they know that they narrowly avoided the Sith Lord they were so close to killing, as Xana and Bane hid in a trapdoor, with Xana masking away their presence. As I said previously, the novel conveyed a "God damn it, the Jedi were so close" sort of feeling, but so close isn't good enough. That's why we have a third entry of this cruel trilogy, with the Sith Grand Plan ongoing. The start of the novel is a bit different from the previous novels, as it sets up what's been going on with the setup in between stories. Instead of starting with a story in play and building the story from there. There isn't anything wrong with this, although it's worth noting, maybe Drew couldn't come up with a way to start the story with everything in play. The novel establishes that Bane and Xana set up an estate on Ciutric 4, posing as sibling merchants, and often making deals with those in the black market for Sith goods. Bane, without the influence of the Obelisk, was able to create the damned holocron that he was unable to create prior. Things seem to be on board for the Sith Grand Plan, except for one thing. Bane, due to age and Sith corruption, is becoming weaker. Now that it's been 10 years, he is now in his mid-40s. He cannot think or move as sharply as what he used to. As well as this, he feels as if Xana should have challenged him by now, and now he's feeling that she too is weak as well. That's why he feels he must find a new apprentice. Problem is though, he's aging heavily now. It took him 20 years to train Xana until he revealed everything he knew, and Xana still hadn't challenged him. The Sith Grand Plan is in danger because an unworthy apprentice could potentially defeat him out of fear, and that unworthy apprentice would most likely cock up the whole plan. But hey, at least they had a plan, unlike the sequel trilogy. Am I right? In case you're wondering, I'm not letting that go anytime soon. Although there is a potential solution to all of this, Given Bane's body is starting to fail him, while Xana appears unaffected by long-time darkside use, he will look for any leads to the original Sith Lord to use the Darth title, Darth Andedu. There is little record of the Sith Lord that Bane could find, presumably since the Jedi and the Republic banned Sith artifacts to the wider public, except for the mention that Darth Andedu was able to, get this,
cheat death,
and managed to live for hundreds of years before being finally overthrown and killed. Although there were no specifying details on the Sith Lord, how could he cheat death? When did he live? Where could he find a lead to unlocking his secrets? So that's Bane's personal goal, set up in the first chapter. Find the secrets of eternal life, so he can find a worthy apprentice at the right time, so that age does not catch up with them. He is going to continue the rule of two, and live for as long as he needs to. Well, this novel, like the last two, reintroduces and creates new characters to come into the story. It's shown that on the mining world of Doan, a Saurian Jedi Knight named Med Tandar is sent to settle a dispute between the planet's royalty and the rebellious miners. It's established that the heir to the throne on the world, Prince Garen, was accidentally killed by the rebels, who intended to disable his speeder, but they did too much damage and he crashed and he died. The rebels are resistant to negotiate. They demand better working conditions, and that's why the Jedi was sent to settle the dispute. The dispute isn't allowed to finish, however, as an Itochi assassin ambushes the rebels and ends up killing the Jedi too after a lengthy back and forth battle. Well, as it turns out, the assassin was hired by the bodyguard of the widow of Prince Garen out of revenge, and it's also revealed that said widow, Princess Sarah, is the exact same daughter of Khalib that Bane threatened in Path of Destruction. I mentioned in the Rule of Two review that Khalib sent his daughter away, getting her to change her name and identity, and to never return to her homeworld of Ambria. Since our only visual reference for her is the Jedi vs. Sith comic, when she was around 8 years old, here she is. Sarah was sent away when she was 16 and became a healer across the galaxy. She eventually met Prince Garen after being hired by the king to heal him. She easily found the illness he had and cured him of it, during which the two fell in love. While the king initially disapproved of them being together, but relented and they got married. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Wrong. This is Star Wars, and the conflict between the light side and the dark side complicates everything. Plus, this story is specifically called Darth Bane Dynasty of Evil. That means that everything's going to go wrong. As I mentioned, Prince Garen died, and the princess's bodyguard hired an assassin to get back at the rebels. The bodyguard in question is another character from Path of Destruction, Lucia, who I don't believe I specifically mentioned, but she was a soldier in the Sith army who fought in the Gloomwalkers. She, along with everyone else, admired Dessel's bravery and selflessness for the unit, and was disgusted that Ulabor got away with arresting Dessel to be court-martialed and likely executed. In a following battle, Lucia shot Ulabor in the back, not feeling an ounce of remorse for the incompetent commander, and doing it in memory of Dessel. Both of these characters have a history with Bane, and we know this cannot end well. Sarah obviously is heavily distraught over the death of her husband. She is called to the king, in which the king is mourning his son's death as much as his wife. She is sent on a mission to talk to the Jedi about this, given that Med Tandar was killed and someone's got to clean up the mess. This is where it's shown that Lucia reveals to the princess that it was her that hired the assassin. But the princess understands what her bodyguard and close friend did and why. At first, I'm wondering how Sarah is going to become a part of the larger story and get involved with Darth Bane again, and it's here where we have our answer. You see, being transported across the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, she notices a shrine with her father's portrait on it. The Jedi showing her around explains that this is the shrine dedicated for those who helped destroy the remnants of the Sith, including Johann Othone, Valentine Varfalla, and everyone else who died in the attempt to extinguish the Sith once and for all. While the Jedi believe they succeed, they of course failed. But still, it's nice to see that there was a shrine put up in their memory. Sarah at first feels distraught, learning the fate of her father. but at the same time, angry that she never got to avenge his death directly. But it's here where Sarah asks about the Sith Lord that was killed. Given Xana turned her cousin Daravit insane, the Jedi presumed that he was the Sith Lord and killed him. Well, as it turns out, that wasn't the case. Sarah clearly remembers the Dark Lord as a tall, muscular man. She realizes in secret that the Dark Lord is still out there. He tricked the Jedi. She, of course, doesn't bother telling the Jedi about their mistake, given they so badly wanted to believe that the Sith were extinct. Sarah is determined to get her revenge on the Dark Man, and gets Lucia to hire the services of the Itachi assassin again. So there's three sides to this story. Bane's perspective, Xana's perspective, and Sarah's perspective, with some secondary characters like the Itachi assassin and Lucia given perspective as well. In Bane's perspective, he requests that a collector find any leads to Darth Andedu. His contact promises him a worthwhile item, and it's here where Bane finds the lead he's searching for. It shows Darth Andedu living on the deep core world of Prakith, and so he's going there to find his lead on discovering the secrets of eternal life. Meanwhile, Xana decides to look for her own apprentice. She has her eyes focused on a man named Set Hearth, identified as a Dark Jedi who long left the Jedi Order. Set is basically a party animal ladies' man. He is dedicated to having as much fun as possible. He couldn't care less about anything else. So far the story is pretty good. Motivations are set up between all three protagonists, and they all interconnect with each other. Xana finds a Rodian who she gets to tell her Set's whereabouts. It continues to show how evil to the core Xana has become, as soon as she gets the information she wants, she kills the Rodian and his buddy in less than a second. The mutual story is building up to that final confrontation. Xana will challenge Bane to the title of Dark Lord. Bane goes to Prakith and easily takes Darth Andedu's holocron from the cult that worships him. As Xana goes to Set Hearth's estate on Nal Hutta and stuns him, intending to take him on as her apprentice. It's quickly shown here though, that Set Hearth isn't the type who really has Sith ideals in mind. He doesn't care about destroying the Jedi and ruling the galaxy, he just wants to have a carefree life. Darth Xana, though, is desperate for an apprentice of her own. She tells Set to swear loyalty to the Sith, and when she confronts her master, he will stay out of it. And if Bane deems him worthy in the case of Xana's death, he may be Bane's new apprentice. Maybe. It was shown at the start that Set Hearth wanted to screw around with Xana. And well, he accepts but still doesn't really care about Sith ideology. We also see, meanwhile, Lucia contracts the Itachi assassin, who I'll call the Huntress since that's her name, to go to Ambria to meet the princess. Sarah at her father's camp meets the Huntress. Said Huntress uses the Force to dive deep into the memories of this place, and she senses Bane's presence. Sarah gives her a ludicrous amount of money to capture the Dark Lord, giving her 20 mercenaries after the Huntress says that she only needs around 10. The Huntress is established as someone who can track people through the Force based on reading memories and whatnot. I think this might be a bit iffy in the grand scheme of things. This novel was written after the Clone Wars came out and retconned a lot. Still though, it is still weird. The Huntress seemed to me like a little overachieving in hindsight, but still she tracks Darth Bane to his estate. She, along with the 20 mercenaries, ambush Darth Bane, with the Huntress being given some poison to subdue him. A bunch of the mercenaries die, but Darth Bane is successfully captured, and is brought to Dome to a super secret prison complex below the castle. Xana comes around but realizes quickly that her master's been captured. She investigates, eventually questioning and killing Bane's contact, where she finds out that it was a lead to Darth Andedu. Set Hearth, who was previously a Jedi, tells Xana about what the Jedi taught him about Darth Andedu, how he found a way to cheat death with a power called Essence Transfer. Speaking of which, Essence Transfer is a powerful ability, but it's also a very risky one-shot ability. Someone with an incredible amount of willpower could attempt it, but they'd also have to overcome the invaded body's will. So ideally you could create a clone, which is a very big reference to Dark Empire, I presume, but Bane doesn't have the time for that. Xana sees this as a complete betrayal of the rule of two. She concludes that Bane is trying to abandon the teachings and instead live forever for his own sake. Learning that Bane is gone, she realizes that she must get to Bane because he may potentially leak information about her and the Sith. This mission takes her and Set to Dome, where they land in the underground prison undetected. The Huntress, Lucia, and Sarah go to the cell where Bane is being locked up in order to question him. Sarah, consumed by rage, has Bane locked up and tries to make him feel the pain he's brought her, but Bane does the exact opposite of what she wants. Bane justifies himself by saying that the strong survive and the weak perish. Khalib, according to him, was weak because he helped others. Those who have power deserve it by virtue of having it. Bane says that he had a pathetic life until he broke his chains. After a minute of torture, Sarah comes out distraught, but Lucia recognizes Bane as Dessel, her idol in the Gloomwalkers. She had no idea what happened to Dessel until now. She reasons that Dessel's changed, but she owes it to him given he saved the Gloomwalkers on many occasions. She wants to return the favor. She thinks that letting Bane free will snap the princess out of her blind hatred and distracted anger. So, she lets him free. Xana goes to find her master, as Set is told to stay on the ship. He gets bored and decides to look for that holocron from Darth and Dedu about eternal life. So he disobeys Xana's orders and goes out anyways. He finds the holocron, but upon returning to the hangar, he meets the Huntress, and it's a confrontation between the two. With Bane being let free meanwhile, he goes on a rampage, killing everyone in his path. Sarah goes to destroy the entire prison complex with a self-destruct sequence put in place. Lucia also tries to speak to Bane, referring to him by his original name. This stops Bane in his tracks. He opts to speak to Lucia briefly, affirming that he is Darth Bane now. Dessel is no more. Lucia knows that the one named Dessel has changed, but still feels she owes him despite that. But before Bane kills her, Darth Xana comes in to confront him. Since Bane doesn't have his lightsaber, Bane has to find a way to get out of this confrontation. Bane and Xana argue with each other on one of their last confrontations. Bane heavily objects to betraying the rule of two, saying how he was trying to instead preserve it by using it to find a worthy apprentice. Xana, in turn, objects to being too weak to face Bane earlier. She says that Bane himself taught her the importance of patience, and she waited many years for this moment. At first, it seems like the final confrontation. We see that Sarah, with the alarms blaring, sneakily retrieves Lucia's body and escapes the complex, turning on the self-destruct sequence and going through an escape pod with Lucia's body. She realizes that her desire for revenge cost her everything and decides to return to Ambria. I mentioned earlier a confrontation between Set and the Huntress. Set negotiates his way out of the confrontation, and the Huntress is forced to let him take a ship out of there. But the Huntress stays behind for a little while longer, as he senses her destiny is upon her. When Bane escapes Xana and comes across the hangar, the Huntress offers herself to him, and Bane sees value in her as an apprentice and takes her on briefly. They travel to Ambria, in which Bane and Sarah have one last discussion before Bane orders the Huntress kill her. Yep, both Sarah and Lucia die in this story. These two characters had meaningful arcs, yet they're still killed off, and Bane doesn't have a second thought about them. That's a common theme in this trilogy, and I'll talk about this at the end. Bane contacts Xana, telling her to meet at Ambria for their final duel, and it's here where the two have their last fight ever. It's Bane versus Xana, and the two clash swords briefly, but due to Bane's growing weakness, his arm is cut off by Xana, and then he pulls his last card. He tries to use essence transfer on Xana, with the two minds dueling with each other, but in the end, Xana proves victorious. Bane has nowhere else to go but chaos, bringing his story to a close. There's a small detail at the end that Xana starts clutching her hand, like Bane did earlier in the story when his body was failing him. This actually led to fan theories that Bane survived, and in actuality passed down until he entered the body of Darth Sidious. However, Drew Karpyshyn has disputed this. He says that the detail was put in to suggest that maybe a bit of Bane remained in Xana. There's also an epilogue with Set about to learn the secrets of essence transfer, and that was Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil. To be honest, this was probably the weakest of the novels, but this was no Spider-Man 3, as stated before. This was well written and well presented, and it's a great way to wrap up a trilogy. This was a trilogy of cruelty, suffering, and death. Let's recap all the notable characters that die in this trilogy. There's all the Sith in the Brotherhood of Darkness, including Githany and Lord Khan. There's also Lord Hoth. There's his apprentice Johann Othone, along with Valentine Farfalla. And then there's Lucia and Princess Sarah. Starting with Lord Hoth, that's a bunch of characters I grew attached to who died. Even Darth Bane died at the end of his own story. And while he was originally sympathetic, it didn't last for long. Bad circumstances lead to another, and he became a Sith, in which he decided to destroy the Brotherhood of Darkness, seeing them as frauds and starting the rule of two. I was surprised how much tension there was in this trilogy and how new conflicts were created. Darth Bane created the rule of two, but in Dynasty of Evil, he realized that he needed to do more to sustain it. And so he sought out Darth Andedu's holocron, but this ultimately led to his final battle and death. Sarah's conflict results in her downfall. Hateful over losing her husband and father, she became consumed by hatred and tried to get revenge, but ultimately revenge in the end didn't work, and she accepted that her friend's death was her fault. She should have let it go long before. Trust me, I myself would know, to a less severe extent. Sarah, realizing her mistake, really stuck with me as a matter of fact. She accepted her fate at the end, and that I can commend in a character. It doesn't change how sad it was, but she died with her dignity intact. The story of Darth Bane was filled with good and bad characters alike, who served their purpose in Darth Bane. All the characters were interconnected with him somehow. Sarah was in Path of Destruction as the helpless girl threatened by Bane, which forced Khalib to heal him from the poison. She, like Lucia, showed up later in Dynasty of Evil. Lord Hoth dies in Path of Destruction, but we see that his close ally, Farfalla, and his apprentice Johann live on. The story builds and builds to a confrontation with the Sith, but they die trying. And sadly, it's ultimately in vain. This is only a slice in the painful journey of the Sith from Darth Bane to Darth Sidious. There is one detail from the Darth Plagueis novel where a man named Darth Gravid tried to destroy Sith artifacts to reform them after having a moral dilemma from studying the Jedi. With that being said, the Sith, despite being the antagonists, had problems of their own. And that's an interesting thing that the Darth Bane Trilogy shows. That Darth Bane was a perfect Sith Lord. The quest to destroy the Jedi and rule the galaxy was a hard, long process of specific decisions made over generations. It's shown that Darth Plagueis' plan for ruling the galaxy was quite different than Darth Sidious. Still though, most Sith in this line did what they could to slowly and steadily weaken the Republic. This trilogy gave the Star Wars saga more weight, especially with lines such as,
"The oppression of the Sith will never return. You have lost."
Right before the oppression of the Sith returns, and the Jedi are wiped out. Despite Bane being the main character, they remind us that the Jedi are the good guys, and Bane is a selfish, self-serving monster that pursues greater power. This trilogy also reinforces Sith ideology. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength I gain power. Through power I gain victory. Through victory my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. Very expansive as novels. This is what a novel should opt to do, instead of small, insignificant stories that don't expand on anything. That's the problem Disney canon has. Speaking of Disney, Drew Karpyshyn was planning to do a Darth Xana novel after he was done with Darth Bane, But then the reboot happened, and Disney didn't allow any of the Star Wars Expanded Universe authors to continue with the Expanded Universe. It was either transferred to Disney canon novels or fuck off. Speaking personally, I would totally read the Darth Santa novel. I'm just hoping that Disney gives Drew Karpyshyn, if they hypothetically let him do it, let him write the story in peace without interruptions. Although if they were going to continue the Expanded Universe, I'd imagine that they'd only release books and comics at a far more infrequent rate than Disney canon. They'd also have to do something about the Clone Wars show at that in Legends canon. I heard one time they released the Legends comic and it outsold any Disney canon comic. They should know how profitable continuing the EU should be, but they refuse to do it. I presume it's Kathleen Kennedy's decision. She can't top the Expanded Universe, so she'll just force people to eat up the shitty new. That's why she pretended the Expanded Universe doesn't exist. Seriously, more money is staring them right in the face. Although on the upside, Disney would probably ruin the EU, so I'm sort of against a full-on continuation. They'd force authors to do dumb things, but if the Star Wars Legends novels came out at an infrequent rate, and the writers were given more freedom, that might work. First though, get Dave Filoni's show out of Legends. ASAP. Nobody who likes the Expanded Universe is going to miss it. It made everything a mess. Keep it in Disney canon and let Filoni fuck around in that. Well, actually don't. Someone needs to keep him on a short leash, given how much he overwrites Disney canon too. So with that being said, that's my review of Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil. I give this novel a 9 out of 10. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories with mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.